Well, that's, I think, a very fair question. Not so hard, though. Absolutely. In Romans chapter 9 through Romans chapter 11, that whole section, Paul is considering, now, what about his physical brethren, Jews we call them loosely, the 10 tribes and the 2, wherever the 10 may be, doesn't matter, the 2 tribes, Judah, Benjamin, and some of the Levites. What about them? Because they have not taken, as a whole, they have not accepted the Messiah who came. What about their future? Paul is able to say 2 different things. On the one hand, they are enemies currently of the gospel. Enemies of the gospel. You don't want to water that down and say, well, they're all good boys because they're just Jewish by blood, and that means that they are right with God automatically. That's just false. They are enemies of the gospel currently for Paul. But that's not quite the end of the story. So replacement theology is wrong in this sense, where it says that God is finished with the, I'll call them the Jewish people, the 10 tribes, the 2 tribes, unconverted, now blinded, ethnic Israel, I'll call them. Israel of the flesh, as Paul actually calls them in 1 Corinthians 10, physical, non-converted Israel. What about them? They are enemies of the gospel for your sake. That's to say, you Gentiles now are free to accept the Messiah and his gospel of the kingdom and the one God of Israel. You are becoming Christians. And when a final quota of Gentiles have come into the group, then Paul says all Israel will be saved. That's to say, a remnant. I don't think just every Israelite, just by being an Israelite, but there's coming a time when a substantial, a collective group of now blinded ethnic Israel, through the Great Tribulation and the sufferings that accompany that terrible time, they will say, I get it. I see. God is now bringing us Israelites into the faith, and they will accept the Messiah as the Jesus who came and will be coming again. Meanwhile, however, Paul is trying to save as many of those Israelites, as well as Gentiles, of course, as he possibly can, and he won some. He himself was a Jewish convert to the Christian faith. He saves as many as he can. He preaches the gospel of the kingdom and things concerning Jesus. That's Acts 8:12, where Philip was giving that marvelous formula. He preaches that to everybody he can find, but he has to say that the majority of the Israel after the flesh, call them ethnic, blinded Israel now, are not responding. But that's not quite the end of the story, because they do have a future. And then, of course, Old Testament prophecy is full of glorious promises of the restoration of national Israel, currently blinded ethnic Israel. When they come to the faith in Messiah, they'll say, isn't this awful? We actually killed our own Messiah. Now we get it. We're now going to accept him. And they will be allowed to survive into the kingdom of God as a unit of Israelite people. Along, may I say, though, with Egypt and Assyria. Isaiah 19 is key here. God will be able to say, people will be able to say at that time, blessed be my people Israel, my people Egypt, and my people Assyria. The inveterate enemies of Israel will come to faith. Not every one of them. Some will rebel to the end and will not be allowed to be there in the kingdom. But a collective remnant whole, providing then and creating a new situation in the millennial kingdom, the millennium being the first stage of the kingdom of God on earth, the first stage, 1,000 years, there will be national units of whom one may say they are converted as a nation. You cannot say that about any nation state today. In that day, by Yom HaHu in the Hebrew, in that day, that very future day, the day of the coming of Messiah to establish peace on the earth, which is the essence of the gospel of the kingdom, we're going to have a completely new situation. Right now, as we know, there's a great deal of conflict between Israel and its neighboring neighbors, but that's coming to an end. The time is coming when you will not be able to build a tank or get out a gun to shoot somebody else. You won't be able to do it. Now, in this future idyllic paradise on earth, the first stage of the kingdom of God, the millennial kingdom of Revelation 20, of course, Jesus will be in charge and the devil will have been bound. So I said to my Church of Christ friends, with great respect to you, cannot say on the one hand that the devil has been bound already at the cross, and on the other hand that he is currently the God of this age and deceiving the entire world. That's impossible. You can't have them at the same time. You can't be reading this book and not reading this book at the same time. That's a contradiction. So premillennialism, in the classical sense, is correct in Revelation 20. You've got a picture there of people who had been beheaded. Some of them are martyrs. They're now sitting on thrones. They had been beheaded and then brought to life, and they began to reign. That's resurrection. Resurrection is not a complicated idea. It means that somebody who's been dead, sleeping the sleep of death in the dust of the ground, comes to life and begins to reign with Messiah for 1,000 years. That is future. Some of the Corinthians got big-headed in 1 Corinthians 4, I think it is, and Paul had to rebuke them and point out to them that they were not ruling with Christ then. Would to God that we were ruling, Paul says, so you could be ruling with us. But the messianic future, the reward of the saints to be administering a new world order with Messiah, that's in the future. Don't kid yourself. You're not taking charge of the world right now. But your destiny as a Christian, as in Daniel chapter 7, which should be preached, I used to say humorously to the students, preach about 2 or 3 times every Sunday till people get it. Revelation 7, verses 18, 22, and 27, marvelous picture of the destiny of the saints to administer the new system, the new heavens and earth, new social order, that is, which will begin to be when Messiah comes back.